On this episode, we're going to talk about the front wheel conversion. So I picked up these BST wheels on eBay. I've been looking for these wheels ever since I got the bike. You can buy them new. There's nothing wrong with that. They're just really expensive. So I had a search saved. I was checking Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist and eBay, you know, the places where we go to find stuff we want. And these popped up. So these have a 25 millimeter diameter bearing set in them when I bought them. They're for a 97 to 99. And there's a couple of ways to make them fit this motorcycle. You can buy another set of forks that fit the wheel, or you can fit the wheel to the bike. So these forks are dual adjustable, top compression and rebound. They've been rebuilt by the guy before me with all of the hot rod parts, and the bike is set up perfectly for me. So there's no need to put different forks on there. The motorcycle talks to me because the Moto Gadget is still connected. So how to go about fitting the wheel to the bike instead of the bike to the wheel. I got on the Ducati forums and I read around, and you know, there's different methods to achieve your end goal. This is just one of them. It's the one that I used. So if we look at the Brembo, it's 150 millimeters onto the braking surface. Same with this BST wheel. So the bearing spacing on this wheel was 105 millimeters outside to outside, and it was running a 17 ID 47 OD 14 millimeter bearing. So this was the bearing out of this wheel, 25 millimeter. I bought these, but I bought them by mistake. Okay, I was online searching. The difference between the bearings of this wheel and this wheel is 14 millimeters and 12 millimeters across. So I looked online. I figured somebody made some 47, 17, 12s, but that's not what these turned out to be. They turned out to be 42. So wrong. That's all me. I took the bearings out of this wheel and stuck them in that wheel, and I made a new spacer in between. This was this spacer out of the Brembo, and then squished them all together and adjusted it to fit. I'll go into that in a minute. But first, let's talk about some stuff. The Brembo has a lip on the inside here. And it has a lip on the inside here. And so the lips are 5 millimeters thick. This is the drive side of the bike. So this is the slot where the speed turner dillamajig thingy fits into the part over there that's, you know, turns the cable that goes up. This wheel has the same setup for the year models. It's not electronically driven, it's mechanically driven. So when you measured all of this, it was 105 outside to outside. And when I measured this brake spacing is the same, 150 millimeters. So the brakes fit. The spacing on the bearings was 109 millimeters outside to outside. So we're 4 millimeters too wide, plus it's a 25 millimeter axle. So it's not going to fit unless we make it fit. This wheel only has one bearing ridge, and it's on the other side. This side where the bearing goes in is open, so it can move in and out adjustment wise. There's probably a way where you could measure the depth on this gear drive and shrink that to make it fit. But let's back up and talk about fitting this wheel. So the first thing I did was knock the bearings out and the center spacer. So their center spacer was aluminum, and it keeps the bearings from squishing in on each other and making any changes. So when you do the math, basically you got to come up with 4 millimeters. And you also have to get this thing centered in the brake calipers. So to do that, you have to take material off of the bearing ridge on the outside of the wheel, this side of the wheel. The bearing ridge on that side of the wheel is 5 millimeters. And you need to take 2 mils off and adjust it down to 3 millimeters. So you could take it to a machine shop or something like that, and they could mill it off and make it, you know, good. Or you can do it yourself, which is what I did. So in the Burt Monroe style of doing everything in your own shop, I took a Dremel tool with a carbide bit, and I put a little stopper on it until the stopper rested up against the face, and then I could push it in here and grind on this and take it down to 3 mils. It took a while, but it wasn't that hard. You just have to be careful, and you can do it. It's just like a little bitty milling machine. You just move with your hand. Take a little bit off, measure, take a little bit off, measure, and get it flat. And then this wheel has a big C-clip that goes in to hold it in place. So the bearing is wedged between the bearing ridge and the C-clip. So the bearing can't move like this. This side's wide open. So that bearing can move as much as you want. Within reason, it can't go all the way in, but you get what I'm saying. So this is my fixed point over here. And then from the outside, you make a measurement to the outside here. You want it about 105 millimeters. And so if we take 14 and 14, and we go into 105, we need 81 millimeters. So I had this aluminum from a previous motorcycle wheel job. It's 17 millimeter ID. So I cut this down to 81, smashed it all together, and then started fitting it to the bike. This one didn't really work. So this was the first go around, and I didn't like it, so I took everything apart and redid it the same way, but I was better at it the second time around. So you've got your 14, 14, 81 on the middle. You got your 105 diameter. But then it's still not gonna, it may or may not line up perfectly with the brake rotors. So let's talk about that. So if we look down here, this is the axle, and it has a raised surface on it. So the outside of that axle pushes on the inside of this bearing, and you're pulling the wheel this way when you install it. So you're screwing that axle and it's fitted over here, and you're pulling this side tight up against here. We hold the axle in place with these bolts down here. So we can adjust this wheel by changing things on this side. So this is our Speedo gear drive, and it's got sleeve in there. It fits up against this bearing face on this side. And so I got my bearings to about 105. Squished everything together, and the wheel was a little bit that way. And what I'm talking about is inside the brake caliper. So you can see where the rotor fits in there. And we can move the rotor left or right inside of the calipers by changing this. So when I initially installed it, it was almost touching the inside of the caliper. So I needed to move the wheel a little bit that way. So this had a ridge on the outside of it. I ground that ridge off and then, you know, sanded it flat on a piece of glass. So this was basically 2 mils right here. So the whole wheel went like this way, 2 millimeters. And that moved my brake rotor over 2 millimeters, which centered it up in the middle of the brake caliper. And so what you do on this side affects the whole thing. So the whole wheel shifted 2 mils this way. And then everything lined up. And we were able to spin. Now, I've pushed the pads out a little bit so they're not so grabby, but they work. This wheel had slots in it for this gear drive. So that's the old gear drive from the Brembo wheel. I just had to take it out of the wheel, and these little tabs were kind of bent up to fit. I just smashed them down, and then they fit inside there. And then it fits inside here to meet up with the gear drive and turn the speedometer. The gear drive insert for the wheel has a larger diameter than the bearing shaft, so it floats on the outside and it doesn't actually touch anything that's moving except for the gear drive inside there. We could call this the internals of the wheel. So this is Brembo 17 millimeter. This is BST 25 millimeter. So you can see that Brembo's a little shorter. There were some people that said you could buy a shaft and put it in there. So 17 millimeter ID, 25 millimeter OD would get you where you want to go. My concern was that if this shaft was floating inside there, the axle's only touching this, it's not touching this, so the whole thing could still shift back and forth on the axle spacer that you're going to make. And I didn't like that. So I went ahead and adjusted the whole wheel by grinding on the inside. Again, if you could find a 47, 17, 12, you wouldn't have to do any grinding on the inside of the wheel. I only found one company in China that made bearings like that, and you had to buy 100 of them, and I didn't feel like I needed 100, so I went with the alternate route. And, you know, I took the old bearings out of the old wheel, put them in the new wheel because they're the same outer diameter, and then fitted the wheel to the bike. So in my original, I went like that. And so, you know, that worked.